Dawn came like a whisper, a pale hand brushing the rough edges of the town. Dust hung in lazy spirals above the streets, catching the first timid rays of the sun. Before the town could mock her, she had a secret they would never see coming. Watch as this overlooked bride steps into the mountains and discovers a love and courage that changes everything. Don't miss a single moment of her journey. Every glance, every whisper, every heartbeat matters. Wooden planks creaked as the wind drifted between shuttered windows, carrying the scent of cold earth and distant pine. The town seemed to hold its breath, as though it knew the day ahead would carry more than ordinary hours. She walked along the boardwalk, careful, measured, as though each step was a conversation she did not yet trust the world to hear. Her skirts were plain, stitched by hands that knew hardship as intimately as the mountains that loomed beyond the valley. Eyes turned as she passed, some curious, some amused, but she kept her gaze low, hands tucked lightly against her sides, a shield invisible yet palpable. The children whispered first, their voices thin but sharp, like reeds snapping under the wind. "There she goes again," one muttered. Another echoed, "Poor thing, no one will ever want her." They giggled, though not cruelly, only as a reflex taught by the adults who had already decided her story. Her story. She carried it in quiet folds within her chest, the kind of story that bruised softly but never showed its deepest pain. She had loved once, or thought she had. Once, she had believed the words and eyes of another could carve a home within her. But that man had walked away, leaving behind the hollow echo of laughter that followed her through streets and saloons alike. His rejection was not shouted, not violent, but worse, a polite, calm indifference, the kind that whispers you are not worth a second thought. Yet she did not crumble. She had learned the art of moving through the world as a shadow does, present but unseen, listening, noticing, surviving. There was a strength there, quiet but unyielding, though no one in the town seemed to see it. And then came the news, as if carried by the wind from the mountains themselves. She was to marry the mountain trapper. The town's response was instantaneous. Laughter first, sharp and brittle, like glass breaking in sunlight. Whispers spread like wildfire across the dusty streets. A woman so overlooked, so fragile in the eyes of the crowd, daring to wed a man who lived far from their judgment, far from their civilization. Some shook their heads as though pity alone could speak for them. Others murmured excitement, thinking of scandal, of stories to embellish for years. No one stopped to consider her choice. No one asked if the match was her own, or if she had known him, or if she had even wanted to marry at all. The town assumed they knew her heart better than she did. And yet, when the news reached her ears, she did not cry. She did not argue. She did not plead for understanding or defend herself. Silence was her armor now, as it had always been. She allowed the wind to carry the laughter, the mockery, the disbelief, as she turned her gaze to the mountains that rose beyond the horizon. They were silent witnesses, as ancient and steadfast as the earth itself. The mountain trapper was rarely seen in town. He moved like a shadow cast by the peaks, appearing only when necessity demanded it. Rumor painted him as harsh, unyielding, a man carved by frost and stone. Few knew his face, fewer knew his hands, and no one could claim to understand him. He did not court attention. He did not seek admiration. He simply existed, a presence both solid and enigmatic. The townspeople speculated endlessly. Why would he marry her? Why would a woman so quiet, so overlooked, choose a man so distant, so unknowable? They did not see the truth that hid behind simple acts. A shared glance, a moment of understanding, a quiet respect earned, not begged. As the days passed, she prepared in silence. The world around her buzzed with expectation and amusement, while she moved through her routines with care. She packed her few belongings, wrapped in cloth that smelled faintly of lavender and pine. She took one last walk through the streets of her childhood, noting every detail she had ignored before. The way the sunlight fell across the saloon doors, the crooked sign above the general store, the horse that whinnied softly by the corral. Everything familiar now seemed distant, irrelevant, as though she were walking toward a life that belonged entirely to herself, outside the reach of judgment. The first man watched her from the edge of the crowd as she left. His expression was unreadable at first, then a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or disbelief, passed over his features. He had dismissed her once, thinking her spirit fragile, her presence inconsequential. Now, as he saw her stride confidently toward a future no one in town could claim, he understood, too late, that she had always been stronger than anyone had allowed themselves to notice. The mountain path rose steeply, winding through pines and rocky outcroppings. The wind carried a chill that seeped through her sleeves, brushing against her cheeks like a cold whisper. Birds called from high branches, and somewhere, the distant river sang its age-old song. Here, she felt a quiet freedom, the kind that no town, no gossip, no laughter could touch. And then she saw him. He waited at the clearing by the cabin, tall and steady, his figure outlined by the soft gold of morning. There was no grand gesture, no booming declaration, only presence, solid as the mountains, calm as the wind through the pines. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, unhurried, and in that instant, the world of mockery and misunderstanding melted into irrelevance. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply nodded, an acknowledgement of everything she had endured, of everything she had survived, of the quiet strength she carried like a flame within her chest. For the first time in her life, she did not feel small. She did not feel unseen. She felt recognized, not because she had begged to be noticed, but because someone had chosen to see her as she was, resilient, gentle, brave, and alive. And yet, the town's laughter lingered in the corners of her memory, a faint echo she could not entirely shake. She wondered what they would say when they learned that the mountain trapper had not married her out of pity. She wondered if they would ever understand that strength could be quiet, that courage could be invisible, that love could bloom in places untouched by the eyes of others. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the clearing. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, carrying away fear and doubt alike. Behind her, the town continued its routines, its gossip, its laughter, but here, in the mountains, silence reigned. And within that silence, something tender and unshakable began to grow. She walked toward the cabin, each step deliberate, each footfall a promise to herself. The mountains watched, patient and eternal. The wind whispered secrets through the pines, carrying with it the faintest scent of snow yet to fall. And she, once mocked, once overlooked, once fragile, felt the stirrings of a life finally hers to hold. And so the stage was set. The town would watch, the mountains would wait, and a quiet story of resilience and understanding began to unfold. A story that would not hurry, would not shout, and would not yield its truth until the night when the world could no longer ignore it. The path narrowed as she climbed, each step pressing her closer to the mountains she had watched from below for so many years. The town lay behind her, dust rising like a memory she no longer needed to carry. Morning light spilled over ridges and rock, brushing pine needles with a glow that felt soft and eternal. Every gust of wind seemed to whisper welcome, and every creak of old wood underfoot felt like an invitation. The cabin appeared as if it had grown from the earth itself. Logs worn smooth by time, a stone chimney curling smoke into the sky, and windows catching the sun like quiet lanterns. It was not large, not ornate, but it carried the dignity of simplicity, the kind of place where life was measured by care, not show. He waited at the door. He had waited for her. His figure was quiet, steady, a man shaped by frost, fire, and labor, yet softened by something unseen. His eyes, dark and calm, watched her approach without urgency. There was no performance here, no display of strength to impress. Only a man who existed wholly in the space he occupied, present for her in a way the town had never been. She paused at the threshold, hand resting lightly against the frame. The air smelled of pine and smoke, of earth pressed into stone, and she realized, with a strange, tender shock, that she had never breathed like this before. Not freely, not without the weight of judgment pressing against her chest. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. Not a greeting, not a command, only acknowledgement. It said, "You are here. You're seen. You're welcome." And in that nod, the weight of years and whispers and laughter lifted just enough for her to feel something she had almost forgotten: belonging. The cabin's interior was simple, purposeful, and quiet. A table carved from the trunk of a great tree. Chairs that bore the gentle curves of hands that knew how to work with patience rather than haste. A hearth that waited to cradle the night. Every object seemed to hum with care, with the deliberate attention of someone who had learned the value of what is steady, what lasts. She set down her modest bundle, brushing away the dust of the trail. Her hands, roughened by necessity but graceful in motion, lingered over the worn surfaces, feeling their history. Here, each mark told a story. Here, there was no need to pretend. Here, the world's noise had not yet found a way to intrude. He watched, silent, not out of distance but out of respect. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying neither judgment nor command. "The river is running high this morning. You'll hear it through the window tonight. It will tell you the world is awake even when the forest is still." She listened, noting the simplicity of his words, their unassuming weight. He did not seek to impress or entertain. He simply shared a truth he knew would matter. She realized, then, that she had never before met a man who treated her as a person, rather than a puzzle or a curiosity. Days passed quietly, measured in the rhythm of survival and small, deliberate acts. She learned to carry water from the stream, to tend the hearth, to move about the cabin without making a sound that would disturb the fragile balance of peace. He moved beside her, never intruding, never demanding, only existing with the steady constancy of stone. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, silence stretching comfortably between them. She learned to notice the small gestures that spoke volumes. The way he sharpened his tools with care, the way he checked the cabin seams for drafts, the way he set food upon the table without a word. There was a patience in him that seemed to echo the mountains themselves, and in it, she began to feel a softness in herself that she had not dared to explore. One afternoon, as the wind rattled the loose shingles and the pine needles danced across the clearing, a visitor arrived, a woman from a neighboring valley. She carried news from the town, but more importantly, she carried the awareness of change. She had seen the way the heroine moved through the cabin, the way her eyes held a quiet brightness. "She's different," the woman said simply, not unkindly, but with the same respect she would afford a wild animal that had learned to trust without losing its nature. "I didn't expect this." The mountain trapper said nothing. He poured tea into 2 cups, his movements deliberate, letting the woman's words float in the air without interference. The heroine understood the unspoken lesson. Here, no one's judgment defined her. Here, the truth of her being was enough. Evenings grew longer, and with them came the river's song, tumbling over stones and fallen logs, carrying the mountain's own steady heartbeat into their lives. She learned to sit by the water's edge, letting the sound fill the hollow spaces in her chest that years of neglect and scorn had carved. He would sit beside her sometimes, not touching, not demanding, only present, as if the world had agreed to pause and let them simply exist in its rhythm. Slowly, she began to speak, first in fragments, then in longer sentences, sharing stories that had never found a listener in the town below. He listened with an attention so rare it made her pulse still. There was no need for dramatics, no need for insistence. He heard her because he chose to, not because circumstance forced him to. She noticed the subtle ways he cared, the little rhythms that spoke of a deep, patient heart. A log placed carefully in the hearth. Water carried just so, to prevent splashing. Tools lined precisely on the shelf. Every small act was a testament to thoughtfulness, to respect, to a consideration that extended to everything and everyone in his domain. She realized, slowly, that these acts, uncelebrated and quiet, were the truest measure of a man. Night fell one evening, and the cabin glowed softly from the hearth, its light spilling over log walls and casting shadows that danced like memory. They sat together in the hush, the air filled with the scent of smoke and pine, and she realized, with gentle astonishment, that she had begun to relax in a way she had never thought possible. The tension in her shoulders had eased. Her thoughts no longer ran in endless spirals of worry and doubt. She had begun to feel, truly feel, that she belonged somewhere. It was a fragile, tender thing, this sense of peace, and she did not take it for granted. She knew the town's laughter and whispers could still reach her if she allowed them. But here in the mountains, their voices were muffled by distance, by the weight of stone and pine and sky. And in that distance, she found a sanctuary she had never imagined. The trapper did not offer affection as the world often demanded it. There were no grand gestures, no declarations. But the small certainties, the quiet meals, the steady presence, the patient listening, were more than any words could convey. He had married her not out of pity, not out of spectacle, but out of recognition, and in that recognition, she began to recognize herself anew. One morning, a gust of wind rattled the cabin, carrying with it a message from the town, a messenger with gossip, assumptions, and questions. She read their letters carefully, but she no longer flinched. The words arrived, but they held no power here. The mountains had claimed her heart before the town had ever understood it. It was a slow awakening, the sense of belonging, but it was profound. She had found a place where her worth was not a matter of spectacle, where she was not measured by others' laughter or assumptions, but by the quiet acts of a man who saw her fully, who acknowledged her without question, who valued her for what she was. And as night fell over the mountains, the first stars appearing like timid sparks against the dark velvet sky, she felt it, a sense of anticipation, not fear. Something important was approaching, something that would reveal not only who she was, but the truth of the bond that had grown in silence, in the slow rhythm of days and nights spent together. The world below might scoff, might whisper, might wait with bated breath for scandal or disappointment. But here, in this house built of quiet things, the heroine had begun to understand a different truth, that love need not shout, that strength need not prove itself, and that peace, once found, could carry her further than anyone below could imagine. The mountains were patient. The wind carried stories through the pines. And she, once overlooked, once mocked, had begun to bloom quietly, invisibly, like a flower opening only for those who choose to see it. And in that stillness, she began to grow, quietly, like the pine needles that caught sunlight in hidden corners. She laughed softly at a bird's call, paused to trace the pattern of frost along the window, and felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in her chest. She was learning, in the simplest of ways, that trust could be given without fear, that care could be returned without demand, that life could be soft and unhurried. The days moved gently toward the wedding, and the town below grew restless, their curiosity sharpening like knives. They whispered about the mountain trapper and the girl they had once dismissed. They speculated endlessly. Yet the heroine, standing in the clearing with the river's murmur at her back, the mountains holding vigil around her, knew that no amount of gossip could touch the truth that had begun to take root. The town had never been quiet for long. Even as the heroine had climbed into the mountains, even as the valley below tried to pretend the story had ended, whispers had grown like wild grass along dusty streets and creaking porches. Now, the wedding was near, and curiosity surged into the air like a storm gathering at the edge of the horizon. Visitors arrived first, those who were curious, those who wanted to witness what they assumed would be spectacle or scandal. Their eyes scanned the mountains, the forests, the cabin perched at the edge of the world, as though a glance might reveal the truth hidden within. But the mountains were patient, and the wind carried only silence in reply. Inside the cabin, the heroine moved with the same quiet precision she always had, but now there was a subtle weight behind her steps. She was aware of the town's gaze, even from a distance. She felt the first man's shadow lurking, a ghost of old indifference and careless cruelty, and yet she walked unshaken. The mountain trapper did not speak of the visitors. He did not remind her of their presence. His calm steadied her, as if the mountains themselves had lent their patience to her shoulders. The first man arrived before the others. He had heard the news, of course, but he could not resist seeing her for himself, imagining perhaps that the years had dulled her spirit, imagining that the life in the mountains might have softened her into something unrecognizable. He found instead a woman quiet but unbroken, resilient but radiant in her own serene way. She did not rush to greet him, did not glance at him for approval. She moved as if she belonged to the world, to herself, in a way he could not understand. The town soon followed, trickling up the mountain trails in small clusters. Women whispered, men sneered quietly behind their hats, children ran ahead, excited for stories they could tell when they returned. They arrived with assumptions, carrying laughter, doubt, and a need to witness confirmation of their judgments. Yet the higher they climbed, the more the mountains swallowed their noise, and the more the heroine's presence seemed to fill the spaces between the trees. The cabin was prepared for the ceremony. A few simple decorations, wildflowers gathered from the forest edges, a ribbon or two draped across the doorway. The table was set with care, small tokens of welcome for those who had come. The heroine had learned the art of stillness, and in it, she moved gracefully, her hands steady, her mind calm. She had learned that anticipation need not be anxious, that presence could be quiet yet commanding. When the townspeople stepped into the clearing, they expected awkwardness, discomfort, perhaps visible regret. They expected the heroine to falter, to betray some trace of doubt, fear, or shame. But what they found was something entirely different. She stood tall, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm, radiating a quiet strength that no whisper or mockery could diminish. The mountain trapper appeared at her side, tall and still, his gaze sweeping across the small crowd without fear, without need for approval. He did not offer a hand for them to shake, nor a smile to disarm. He only stood as himself, and that presence alone silenced much of the crowd. They had come for spectacle, and instead they were met with dignity. The ceremony itself was simple. No minister rode up from town. No flourish of finery or fanfare interrupted the quiet grandeur of nature. The river whispered in the background, the wind rustled the pines, and the mountains watched silently. Words were few but deliberate. The heroine's voice, soft but steady, carried promises that had never before been asked of her. The trapper's voice, firm and calm, answered with equal weight. The first man shifted in the shadows, unease flickering across his features. He had expected hesitation, had expected awkwardness, but he found instead certainty, an inner calm that seemed impervious to all the years of neglect, all the years of gossip, all the years of misunderstanding. The town murmured, some in disbelief, others in quiet envy, but none could deny the truth that stood before them. Evening crept into the mountains, soft and deliberate. Lanterns were lit, casting golden halos over the gathering. The heroine walked beside her husband, not in subservience, but in equality, their steps in quiet rhythm. She could feel the weight of expectations and assumptions pressing against her back like invisible hands, but she carried herself lightly, as though the mountains themselves supported her. And then came the moment she had anticipated but not feared. The first man approached. His gaze lingered, searching for weakness, for doubt, for the smallest crack to confirm his assumptions. But she met him with nothing but steady eyes. There was no pleading, no explanation, no desperation. She had learned that truth need not be justified to those unwilling to see it. He faltered, and in that faltering, the crowd sensed something shifting. The laughter, the whispers, the judgments, they were not swallowed entirely, but they began to seem small, inconsequential against the quiet gravity of what was unfolding. The heroine did not gloat. She did not speak with triumph. She simply stood, fully herself, and the truth of her strength radiated outward. The mountain trapper's hand brushed hers gently, a simple contact that carried the weight of understanding. In it, she felt acknowledgement and recognition, not pity, not obligation, but admiration rooted in knowing. For the first time, she understood the depth of what it meant to be seen, truly seen, by someone who valued her beyond appearances and assumptions. As night fell fully, the ceremony concluded. Guests drifted toward their horses and carriages, murmuring among themselves, unsure of what to make of what they had witnessed. The heroine and her husband remained in the clearing, the river's murmur rising into the quiet dark, stars trembling overhead. She felt a thrill deep in her chest, not of romance or passion, but of understanding. Life had delivered her to a place where her worth was unmeasured by others, where love was not demanded but freely recognized. And in that thrill, she sensed the first stirrings of the revelation that would come later. The truth held close until the night itself revealed the final measure of her strength and the depth of her bond. The first man lingered a moment longer, a shadow among shadows, and then he too withdrew, leaving the mountains and the night to hold the story he could not comprehend. The townspeople descended the trails, muttering, gossiping, and wondering if they had misjudged everything. But no explanation, no argument, no display could undo what the heroine had discovered: the power of being quietly understood, quietly recognized, and quietly loved. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. They moved together in deliberate rhythm, performing the familiar tasks of life shared in trust. No words were needed. The silence spoke volumes. Every glance, every touch, every breath between them carried meaning unspoken, building toward a moment of revelation the town below could never anticipate. The river outside sang its lullaby. The wind rustled the pine branches above, and the stars blinked down like distant witnesses to the quiet, unyielding truth of two lives finally aligned. The night promised a revelation, a climax of understanding, a truth so potent it would echo in the mountains long after the town returned to its routines. She stood at the cabin's threshold once more, looking out into the valley that had once defined her life, and smiled softly, for she understood. The world's laughter was irrelevant, its judgments meaningless. Here, she had found what no one could mock or diminish: recognition, love, and a sanctuary built of patience, resilience, and quiet, enduring strength. And the night waited, patient, for the final truth to bloom. Night draped the mountains like a velvet cloak, soft and infinite. Stars trembled faintly in the dark sky, their lights spilling over pines and peaks, touching the cabin with gentle grace. Inside, the hearth glowed low, casting golden warmth over worn wood and stone. The town below had returned to their routines, whispers fading with the distance, leaving only the quiet, patient mountains as witnesses. The heroine stood at the window, listening to the river's murmur, feeling its pulse echo in her chest. She had walked this path from girlhood to womanhood with careful steps, through laughter and rejection, through neglect and scorn. And now, finally, she was here, seen, understood, and acknowledged, not by the crowd, but by the man who had chosen to see her truth, who had chosen to honor it. He entered the room quietly, closing the door behind him. The shadows shifted, revealing him fully, steady, calm, and entirely present. He did not speak immediately. He simply stood, and in that stillness, the world seemed to pause, as though the mountains themselves held their breath. She turned toward him, heart fluttering not with fear, but with recognition. She had carried her truth silently for so long, and now, at last, she was ready to share it. "I was never broken," she said softly, her voice almost lost to the flicker of the fire. "I only survived, and I had to survive alone because no one wanted to see me as I really was." He stepped closer, eyes calm, unwavering. "I have seen you," he said simply, "not as someone to fix, not as someone to pity. I have seen you as you are, brave, resilient, gentle, and full of life. That is why I married you, not out of need, not out of charity, but because I knew you had always carried your own strength, and I wanted to be by your side as it grew." Tears, unexpected and warm, traced her cheeks. She had never been offered understanding like this. Not in town, not in childhood, not in the years of whispered mockery. Here in this cabin, in this moment, she realized the depth of what it meant to be truly seen. She reached for him, and he took her hand gently, not in possession, not in demand, but as an acknowledgement of her existence, her courage, and her worth. And in that simple gesture, everything unspoken until now, every ridicule, every doubt, every whisper, fell away into irrelevance. Outside, the wind rustled the pines, carrying the sound of the river and the soft chorus of night birds. The mountains held their eternal vigil, and she felt herself part of a greater rhythm, something older and wiser than the town's laughter, something patient and enduring. She spoke again, her voice gaining strength with each word. "They thought they knew me. They thought my life would be one of sorrow and mockery. But I chose this path with you, and I'm stronger than they imagined. I'm not the girl they laughed at. I am me." He smiled, faint but full of warmth, the kind of smile that does not demand return but gives anyway. "You are more than they will ever understand. And yet, you let yourself grow, quietly, in spite of them. That is why you are remarkable. That is why you are loved, not for who they thought you were, but for who you truly are." The heroine leaned into him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. The firelight flickered across their faces, illuminating something older than pride or passion: recognition, respect, and the enduring calm of understanding. At that moment, the truth of the town's mockery became clear. It had never been hers to bear. Their laughter, their whispers, their judgments, they were reflections of fear, envy, and misunderstanding. They had assumed weakness where there was strength. They had assumed failure where there had been survival. And now, in the quiet of the mountains, all assumptions dissolved in the light of what was real and enduring. The first man's shadow seemed to drift through her memory, a reminder that indifference could wound, but only temporarily. She understood now that true validation comes not from the crowd, not from fleeting approval, but from those who see your truth and honor it. The mountain trapper spoke again, softly, almost a whisper. "The night carries stories," he said, "but not all stories are meant for the world. Some are for the ones who live them. Some are for the ones who choose to listen." She nodded, understanding. Their story had always been theirs alone, and yet it was richer because it carried the weight of what had been endured, what had been overlooked, and what had finally been recognized. They moved together in the quiet cabin, performing the small, tender rituals of life shared in trust. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, no triumphs announced to the world. But the depth of connection between them was palpable, more thrilling and satisfying than any spectacle the town could have imagined. The heroine felt laughter welling up softly from her chest, a quiet, triumphant joy. Not at the town, not at the first man, but at the truth finally realized. She was not what anyone had ever said she was. She was whole, worthy, and seen. And she was loved in the way that mattered most, fully, deliberately, without condition. Outside, the mountains were patient, and the night stretched over the valley like a promise kept. Stars flickered above, the river sang its eternal song, and the wind carried the quiet hum of life itself. She felt it all, the continuity of existence, the pulse of the world, and a sense of awe at the beauty of being truly understood. Hours passed like minutes. Dawn would come, and with it, the town would eventually hear whispers of the wedding and the woman they had mocked. But their understanding would be superficial, their judgment incomplete. Only those who had been present in the mountains, who had listened, who had observed the quiet acts of recognition and care, would know the true depth of what had occurred. The heroine finally lay down, resting her head against the mountains themselves, feeling the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of her husband beside her. She thought of the town, the laughter, the whispers, and allowed herself a final, quiet smile. For she knew the truth could not be stolen, could not be diminished, could not be mocked. It lived inside her, alive and unshakable. And in that night, in that cabin perched above the valley, something universal settled into her bones. Life rewards patience. Strength blooms quietly. Love honors truth. And those who wait, those who endure, those who allow themselves to be seen in full, will finally understand the power they always carried. The fire burned low, the river continued its endless song, and the mountains remained steadfast and eternal. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting herself feel fully, completely, without fear or doubt. And the world, in all its rushing, noisy imperfection, could only look on and wonder. Her story shows that strength is quiet, courage is unseen, and love can bloom where no one expects. If this touched your heart, subscribe now and join us for more Wild West tales that make you feel, reflect, and believe in the power of resilience. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We want to hear your story too.